I might do an introduction. Usually what happens is that I do a bit where I introduce the guest and I introduce myself. And then when I go back and edit it, it's so awkward. I don't know, because it's just not natural for me to do that. So I just end up taking that bit out anyway. But just because it would feel better, I think I'll do an introduction. Hello, welcome back. Today I am joined by James Damore, the author of the controversial Google document, as many people called it. It's gone by many names. The what you wrote a year ago, and the subsequent fallout of that, and my video about that incident and all of the media publishing about it was the kick up the bottom that my channel got started on. So it's a real pleasure for me to be joining you today, and I hope that we'll have a interesting conversation. I did want to pester you about one thing. I'm not going to sort of grill you on your memo or like go through it. I know memo isn't what you called it, but that's what I think of it as, and that's what a lot of people know it as. But in the document, when I was defending you in the video I made about it, a lot of the news outlets said that you were saying that women didn't have the ability or skill set to be engineers. Mm-hmm. And although I think that was hugely misrepresentative of what you actually wrote about, you did at one point use the word abilities in the phrase abilities and interests. I actually don't have the memo up right now, which probably would have been a good idea to get that lined up. But do you know the bit I'm talking about?
Right, yeah.
I'll put up a screenshot of it, but could you explain that?
Yeah, so originally I had a whole section on the fact that boys and girls tend to score the same on math tests, like mathematical ability, but then girls tend to score higher on verbal ability. And to the point where if you ask kids, what's your best subject? Twice as many boys will say science or math than girls will, simply because they're that much better at reading and writing.
Wow, yeah, I didn't know that.
Like this, I think, is another cause for the gender gap. Especially, I think it's relevant in seeing like low socioeconomic status, there isn't that much of a gender gap. But then once you go to high socioeconomic status, there is. And so it's not that like women can't become engineers. It's just that why would you if you don't need the money? And you can't do other stuff and you're interested. Obviously, there are still women that are interested, but just like there's so many guys that don't have another option.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, like just speaking personally, I don't think that I have the verbal skills to do some other jobs that maybe I would like to. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate.
No, I know what you mean, and I've heard, I think it was either Eric or Brett Weinstein, Eric or Brett Weinstein talking to Jordan Peterson about this exact thing you're talking about, where the women who are very good at science and math subjects also, they tend to be like a high general intelligence, which means they also have this high verbal intelligence and social intelligence, which, if we're talking about personal experiences, is also something I've experienced in my job, because when I interviewed for the position I currently have, they especially were sort of praising my ability to just get on with them in the interview. I was very like joking around, having a really just an interesting, good conversation and presenting myself well, and they liked that. They wanted me to be in front of clients and to be able to sell the company when I talk to potential clients, even though my primary job is as an engineer. That's an advantageous skill set, but it also means I could have gone into a number of other subjects if those things had interested me. Maybe I could have gone into journalism or teaching or being a professor. Something like that.
Yeah, and even within tech, like there's the product manager role, which you're required to have some amount of technical aptitude, but you also need those social and verbal skills. And this is what annoys me so much, is that they never really point that out and present that as another option to people that are interested in technology but just don't want to stare at their computer screen all day, right? And product managers, they had like 50-50 gender split.
Interesting.
So,
okay, so just to come back to that bit of the memo when you said abilities and interests, you were actually referencing an increase in ability, or rather a difference in abilities between men and women, but not necessarily a lower ability in women, but possibly even a higher one in some situations. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and from what I remember, it was like higher verbal ability, which the reason I took it out was just because people were interpreting that as me saying that women are worse in math.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Even though I said that men and women score about the same. Like maybe I think I also added something about like even within math there are some differences. Like women tend to be better at calculations, mental calculations, while men tend to score higher on like geometric things. So I have
I
a
think that
problem
is
where
more
I
controversial
need to be
though
like
somehow.
really exact.
Like just talking about intelligence and innate ability and sort of differences on a genetic level is such a big. It's like you just can't go there. Like you can talk about difference in interests and people can kind of be on your side, but when you start saying that like one group is stupider or like girls are stupider at one thing, it just sounds like a lot of people like it really pisses them off. So I almost wish that you'd taken it out completely and just taken out the word abilities so that they really wouldn't have had any ammunition against you. And I could have outright called those publications that were smearing you, I could have just outright called them liars rather than just saying they were misrepresenting you. You're being cheeky, to say the least.
Yeah, it's something I regret.
I'm sure you have a lot of regrets.
Like the reason why I always call it a document rather than a memo is because like a memo suggests that I just sent this to everyone and just it was some email, but it was actually a Google Doc that I was constantly editing based on people's comments and stuff.
Okay,
And
I didn't even think of that.
It was like, yeah, it was a very living document, and whatever got leaked was just one snapshot of it.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard you mention that before, but that's interesting. So, was it a lot longer to begin with, and you took stuff out, or what?
I think it was actually shorter to begin with, and then I just kept adding stuff. And I mean, it began really as Google's ideological echo chamber, and I just talked about, how we have this intolerance within the company, and then people kept asking me, example, like why, like what are the examples?
That's interesting.
And so I put in like, hey, this is actually causing difficulties in these things, and we can't talk about gender stuff. And so that was what ended up getting me fired. So it's annoying.
That sounds like a big one. Though I mean, I don't know how big that was compared to all the other stuff that's going on with Google's ideological echo chamber. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who'd be interested to know how the ideology of Google is affecting the service of Google and YouTube. But I suppose that probably would have got you into even more trouble.
And I mean, I did touch on a little bit on the management style within Google versus, say, Apple, where Apple tends to be like very hierarchical and secretive, while Google is more open. And like I pointed out some things where Google is sort of, it hates itself in some ways because it hates that it gets all its money through advertising, and that it will just deprecate old services. So it'll just like throw away old things that users actually really liked and employees. So like Google Reader, for example.
Never heard of it.
And so like, yeah, there are so many things that only made sense within the context of being like a Google employee because we knew all these things. So like no one has actually even asked me about that section where I talk about, what a left wing versus right wing company would be.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't think anything would have even happened if you'd just written that bit, even though that was your whole point. Was that, but yeah, it really did get characterized as this guy's saying that women can't be engineers. It was so frustrating for me reading all those articles, and I suppose it must have been more frustrating for you, of course. So you made some scientific claims in the document about namely about men and women. Most of the stuff about the echo chamber you were just talking about ideas and kind of philosophically speaking. You didn't make any concrete claims about what, there's not really anything to say there scientifically about echo chambers. That's just kind of, there aren't studies either way or whatever. But you did make some claims about differences, the innate differences between men and women. And I don't know how true those claims are. I don't work in that area. I've not read the literature. I've only sort of listened to what Jordan Peterson has said. I've also listened to a lot of feminist talk on the subject because it's hard to escape that sort of thing. And I know that some scientists did criticize your document for the veracity of your claims, and I just wondered how sure were you about those things that you said when you wrote it? Did you know that you were right, or were you sort of maybe?
I mean, I wasn't obviously 100% sure, and so even when I shared it with people, I was asking, "Hey, does this seem right?" And that's why I opened it up to comments. And it was never meant to be, for example, the whole perspective on the gender gap. It was just, these are the causes that we aren't willing to talk about.
Yeah.
And these are some solutions that would address that.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that you put those solutions in was probably, rather, the fact that the version that got leaked was the version that had your solutions in was really good sort of defense for you, because you could point out the fact that you actually did want more women working in tech, and you suggested ways that could happen. So I think that's fortunate or very prudent of you to put those suggestions in, because it didn't make you look like a misogynist. It made it hard for people to explain why you'd said those things. If you're a misogynist, if you thought women shouldn't be engineers, that sort of thing. So good job, or lucky you, either way.
Yeah, I think there are some things where, like, obviously I don't think that all of the things are biological or anything. And I think a lot of these are malleable, which I didn't make it very explicit in the document. And there's also the gender equality paradox thing, where you see in more gender egalitarian countries, the differences between men and women tends to diverge.
Yeah.
And I've heard one explanation for that being that when everything sucks, so it's also poor countries versus rich countries basically too. And so when everything sucks, then everyone is submissive, which would be, so everyone is sort of like a female personality in that. And then when it's rich, then just the men dominate the women. So that's one explanation I've heard.
Okay.
And it's hard to truly falsify that.
Yeah.
I think when you can link so many of these things to prenatal testosterone, though, and the examples where there are women that are born with some of the same levels of prenatal testosterone as boys normally do, and but they're raised as women, but they act so much like boys in certain areas. It's hard to
I see what you mean.
rectify that in just we raised them differently,
Yeah. Although to be fair, I don't know if you've read the Blank Slate, but in that Pinker talks about how small differences in genetics, in innate traits, also cause people to treat you differently, which does have an impact on your environment. So even though the difference might be very big, to be fair, it could be only a small difference, and then when you start acting manly as a woman or as a man, people start treating you more, to represent that.
Right. And there's definitely things where, if your social skills aren't good to begin with, then you just won't get as many interactions with people, and so you'll go more and more into computers or something. And
definitely, yeah. I was going to ask you actually about the differences the sort of generalizations, of course, all of the caveats that you put in the document about hashtag not all women, not all men. That's just consider that to apply to this whole conversation. We're talking about general differences in the population between men and women, not about particular women or particular men or anything like that. But I wanted to know just your personal opinion about how the differences that make women generally less interested in engineering and tech. Do you think those differences could also explain why, when video games, for example, when they first started becoming popular, it was extremely male dominated. The same with the internet and just hobbies, not just jobs. But it seems to me that hobbies would also be affected by the same traits.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really complex issue because there's different things that people get out of computer games and board game type things, and there are some games where the majority of, or it's more female dominated than male dominated.
Yeah, definitely.
Like some of the games that are male dominated tend to be very systemizing, and
Magic the Gathering,
where
right, is very male
yeah,
dominated, and World of War. Sorry, not World of Warcraft. The other one, tabletop. Warhammer. I always confuse those two names. I know they're completely different. And actually, World of
yeah,
Warcraft does have quite significant female population. I think because what you're saying is like it's more social.
right.
There's a social aspect to World of Warcraft that is not quite there in a lot of other games. And sorry, I did interrupted your thought.
No, yeah, and so there's like really good games try to, give users as many different things to interest them as possible, and so I think some of the reasons why boys were initially more interested in video games and stuff is, and especially the early computers, is that the way that boys tend to see computers is like just a tool to understand and play with itself, while the way that girls tend to approach technology is as a tool to affect social change. And it wasn't clear initially how you could actually improve the world by just playing with old Atari stuff.
Yeah.
But like tinkering that and trying to understand how it works and becoming super obsessed with it, that was more of a boy thing. So, but now that there are avenues to make a true social change with it, then it does open up to more girls being interested in it.
Yeah. I think the fact that women are more interested in video games than they used to be is mostly attributed to the fact that games are different to what they used to be, right? Like the internet,
Right.
for example, like the internet was largely male dominated as well, like to an extreme extent, from what I understand, just from anecdotal evidence, admittedly. But the interface of the internet used to be so dense, and the social side of it was fairly minimal. Now that the internet can be used for a much wider range of things and for more and more social purposes, I think that's you see women coming to, or rather you probably seeing what's happening is that the people making these services, games, whatever, are they want to tap into that female market because it's 50% of the population, right? So
Right.
I do see, if you look at old video games, and like I was talking about the internet, there is like some incredibly dense aspects to it. Like there's no shiny filter over it. There's no
Right.
it's not pretty. Like I know that sounds like a big stereotype, but I just, for example, I love the modern XCOM games, XCOM Enemy Within and XCOM 2. Really great games. I was obsessed with them when I first played them, and so I looked up the original XCOM, which was an old game on the PC, to see what that was like, and it looked horrible. Like I love the games that these became, and even I could not stomach this like awful interface, like incredibly like terrible graphics. Like it just looked so impenetrable, right? And
Yeah.
I think that
Although
yeah.
that may happen to most people now, just because we've become accustomed to really good interfaces. But
Yeah, probably.
yeah, it could have definitely been a factor early on. And I think like Magic the Gathering is though a good example because there are so many facets in which people are interested, and they even say that maybe like 40% of the people that play Magic are women, but that in tournaments and stuff it's like 5% or something.
Yeah.
And because like I've talked with people and it's like, oh yeah, they get really into the story or they really like the art on it. Like there's just so many different ways of interacting with the game besides competing and fighting against people for like no real reason. Like there's no monetary gain. There's like only if you become super good at the top of the hierarchy do you ever get famous playing Magic, right? But there's just like so many obsessive nerdy guys that play competitively, and so it depends on what aspect of the game people are interested in, maybe.
True, yeah. I mean, I was also I've seen in the background of some of your other interviews. You had a sort of stack of board games, so I know I like board games as well. I play them with my husband, and we have a little board game night at work. And having played board games with like my family and just people I know, compared to playing it with other engineers, it's like the difference is very stark. It's like the way that they play is like it's amazing. It's like usually I can just sit back and relax if it's competitive, right? And then I'm playing with the other engineers and I'm like, actually I have to pay attention. Like these guys are really paying attention to like 4 steps ahead, like what are all the possible outcomes. And they're not even like taking ages with their turns. It's like they'll like consider 3 possible things, and I'll have only thought of the first one and thought that sounds like a pretty good turn. I'll just do that. And then, I mean, is that your experience? You play board games with people who are like smarter than you or as smart as you?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely played board games with a variety of people of different skill levels, and and there's also the difference of how much people adhere to the rules. And I find that to be more of an engineering type thing where, like, and something that I dislike now that maybe I had earlier is, playing games to win rather than playing games to have fun. And so, I mean, I think it's more common in at least a lot of these nerdy guys or whatever to play to win. And like,
that's interesting.
I do also play to win, but I mean, my overarching goal is to have fun. So if there's a conflict between the two, then I'll try to have fun and not get super mad when like someone breaks the rules or there's just like some little conflict.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. Well, competitiveness is stereotypically a male trait. I was going to ask you about the hypermasculinity theory of autism, but before going into that, I kind of have to explain my slightly weird, unscientific view of what autism is, and I thought maybe I could just talk through that with you, because I think being a very, very good engineer, or like very good at coding, or like to be working at Google or like a really elite company, like well-known companies, not my level of engineer, but like a really, really good engineer. I think you need like high-functioning autism plus intelligence. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to address the thing before too on like men being more competitive and that influencing things. I think part of it too is women try to find like social consensus, and they care more about people's feelings and stuff, and so in that way they would want the game to go smoother rather than no, I want to win at all costs. But so to it.
I was going to say that too, actually, but then I thought, I get a lot of comments from people, and I'm quite careful about what I say these days. But I was going to say that I think women are less competitive, and maybe like women care less when they lose. Like they just like, well, I learned how to play the game and we had fun. They're not really that interested in throwing a tantrum. And then I was thinking about like the kind of the stereotype of the extremely whiny girl or woman. It's not impossible to imagine a woman getting extremely upset about losing a game.
Right.
Although that is something that I would attribute more to men. If I'm imagining someone being a sore loser, in my head it's a man, but I don't know what that means. That's not scientific. That's just that's just my bias, you could say.
I think part of it is that men's value comes from their competence, and so you get sort of that masculinity threat or whatever, and sociologists call it that when you do lose as a man, and so there might be that added thing to make men worse at losing in some ways. Yeah. I think there's compounding factors where boys, when they're growing up, they will compete a lot with each other, and so boys tend to learn how to win and lose gracefully, especially in sports, right? Like that is what good sportsmanship is. And while girls tend to do more cooperative games and more one-on-one talking about maybe your feelings and stuff, which guys just don't do. And so, there's just a lot of different conflicting things. And, I would hate to attribute it to biology or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it's easy to sort of imagine how these things could be biologically influenced, but I do perhaps think it might be a little bit dangerous to just assume a biological cause for everything as default, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's wise to just say, well, we're just saying it could have a biological cause until we have some studies or some link to some hormone to say otherwise.
Right. And I mean, the link would be that testosterone makes you more status aware, which also indirectly causes you to be more aggressive, because when you're more status aware, if someone disses you or something, then you have to retaliate.
But equally, neuroticism, which you've talked about in your document, not to be disparaging of women, but the negative emotion that would ensue from losing a game might be stronger in a woman. They might be more likely to cry, for instance, or just to be, to sulk or to be in a bad mood for a while. And especially, like you said, if they haven't been prepared, if they haven't had a lot of losses in the past to learn from, if they've not had that competitive experience, I could imagine that. Sorry, I keep dropping my notebook.
And I mean, I think, too, we have to be cognizant of men and women tending to approach stress differently, where like the flight or fight response is actually a more male typical response, while the female response tends to be more tend or befriend. And so, like, when a woman has a really stressful day, they want to talk to their partner about it or something, while maybe the husband wants to just sit down and either solve the problem or just not think about it.
Yeah, just forget about it. Yeah.
And that actually causes a lot of problems in relationships, because you're simulating yourself and the other person. And I'm always like, no, just don't think about it. And then they're like, no, tell me what's happening. It's like,
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, it's no secret that I think the differences between men and women, whether they're biological or not, are a big source of conflict in relationships. And I think that's, of course, that's not very comfortable when you're in an argument, but I also think it is kind of, it's good. Like, it prepares you for big arguments. When you have these small arguments, like, it forces you to see things from another person's perspective, when that person has vastly different reactions to things to you. I think it's an opportunity for personal growth, although sometimes it also can destroy a relationship if that opportunity is not, if you don't rise to the challenge, so to speak. Okay.
And it's also depressing in that, like, if we're telling everyone that men and women are exactly the same, and like that these differences don't exist, then I would never have realized that, hey, how I think about things is not how most women think about things in that way.
Yeah.
So, and this actually causes a lot of problems in the workplace, because it makes women think that men are just being insensitive, and it actually makes men think that women are being incompetent in some of these differences.
Yeah.
Like, if you would cry, for example, at work, like, for me to cry at work would mean that, like, I had something extremely traumatic happen. And so a woman crying for something that isn't that extreme would indicate to me that they're just weak, when really women cry more often than men. Like,
yeah, no, I've cried a lot at work. And not just because of stress of work. I mean, like, if a song comes on, if I'm listening to music and a song comes on that makes me sad, I'll just go into the bathroom and cry. Like, if I'm in if I'm in that kind of mood, it's not an indication of, like, me finding my job difficult. It's like, I'll come back 5 minutes later and I'll be fine again. It's not, it's not actually impeding my productivity at all. It's just one of those things. Like, I just cry a lot.
And, like, there's so many things where, like, men tend to be more direct, while women maybe want to form a consensus within the group and want to ask questions, even though they know the answer to it. And so, like, I would never ask a question that I already know the answer to, because that would make me look dumb. But women will openly do that because they want everyone to know the answer to that.
Yeah.
And so if I'm interpreting them as myself, then I would think that they're dumb, right? Like, so we really should at least, like, not necessarily assign, oh yeah, all men do this, all women do that, but just, hey, there are different approaches to the workplace.
Yeah.
and to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's there are definitely are advantages to pointing out the differences, whether they are biological or not. I think it's actually not that important, right? I mean, it's kind of
Yeah,
important, academically. If we're suggesting that we change the way we raise men and women, perhaps, but if there are differences, we need to acknowledge them either way, right?
right.
If you can't change those differences, like once someone's grown up, a lot of people say that there's like a moldable period when you're a child. That's the kind of the opposite. The blank slate argument often requires there to be this sort of highly suggestible state in childhood that then becomes more concrete as you age. So once someone gets to that age where they're more concrete and they're not moldable, whether it's for biological reasons or for environmental reasons, we still need to acknowledge that difference, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so I totally agree that it doesn't really even matter that it's biological. And the only reason I mentioned biology in the document was because uh, their whole like I kept getting comments on like, okay, then let's just raise girls differently, and of course we could do that, but then that's saying that the way that women are is actually inferior,
Yeah,
right?
no, absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the
And
things I hate about feminism. I was just talking about that yesterday. Is to the way that some feminists, some people will say that women are this way and men are this way. So we have to change the women to make them like the men. And it's like, well, harsh, right? Like
yeah,
I kind of wanted to, what if women want to raise children? Like, what if they are happy that way? What all of this, like, are you saying that it's inferior for women to want to do that or to do that for their life? I don't know. You're absolutely right.
and unfortunately too, it goes the reverse where sometimes like in school they try to treat people as if they're girls, where like boys will be more like rambunctious and they'll just like be more energetic and really competitive, and no, they want them to be compliant and raise their hand when they talk and not just like jittery,
Yeah.
and so like not really accepting that, hey, that's just how that little boy is, and there's little girls that do that too,
Mm-hmm.
and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and to be honest, though, I've been a little bit skeptical of that argument because I've heard other people say things like that, and to be honest, I don't know how easy it is to teach someone who's trying to run around and like shout all the time. Like that just sounds harder naturally, right? So it's like you can say that we're expecting boys to behave like girls, and maybe that's true, but it also just seems like you're trying to make boys behave like a boy that is easy to teach. That's
Right.
that's my counter argument. I don't want to get into a whole thing about that unless you have
Yeah.
something to add.
I definitely don't think it's like, it's not necessarily that we hate masculinity in boys and we want only femininity and that's the ultimate cause, right? A lot of it is just compliance, and
You don't want
but
children to be shouting at you when you're trying to teach them something.
yeah, and
It's
I
easier that way.
think though maybe there's a way to like understand the underlying needs of that boy and try to see, okay, if he did just have like maybe 30 more minutes of recess, he would be totally fine.
Yeah, that
And,
would be a really interesting thing to study. Actually, I've heard of other studies looking at school start times and finish times, changing that
mhm.
sort of thing. I actually haven't seen anything about what you call recess. We call it like break time, I guess. But
uh,
that'd be interesting. I'd like to see that actually, if it makes a difference.
mhm. Yeah, I've at least heard it does, but I haven't looked too deeply into it.
I mean,
But
that would be
I
an
think,
easy fix, right?
uh, so you asked me about something about autism and
Okay, so I'll go back a little bit because I don't know if you've seen that clip from Dilbert, the cartoon Dilbert, where there's like it's like a little baby Dilbert going to the doctor with his mum, and the doctor's saying that Dilbert has the knack, like he has engineering ability basically,
uh,
and I don't know, like I don't think the cartoon's that funny. It's okay, but for some reason engineers love showing this clip in like lectures that I go to, and like people send me people have sent me the clip on YouTube because like
Oh, really?
I don't know, people think it's funny. I don't know, but it just made me think like because in the skit, the doctor says that the having this engineering ability also comes along with this social what do you call it? The social difficulties, makes them unsociable, and there is that trope. It's a meme of our society that being extremely smart in the engineering field or in mathematics, physics, science comes along with this social awkwardness. And I do wonder if that has something to do with autism spectrum disorders, Asperger's, all that kind of stuff, and what your experience has been with that. Because I'll just introduce for people who don't know. There was like a few months after you published the not published, you didn't publish it. after the document was leaked,
Sure.
There was an interview with you where I don't know if you let slip or if you just explained about how you were diagnosed with autism or some kind of autism spectrum disorder, and then the guy wrote a quite forgiving article about you, saying that the controversial nature of your document might have been in some part due to your autism making you sort of unable to perceive how other people might have interpreted what you said. Is that fair?
Yeah. So I guess the history on how that interview came about was, I think in the Reddit AMA, someone just asked me if I had like autism or high functioning autism, and
people ask me all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think maybe it was apparent from some of the interviews that I gave too. At least when I look at my own interviews, I think I'm a little awkward. So probably.
Yeah. Sorry, no, I didn't mean like you're awkward. I just meant people do associate awkwardness with autism, which is, I mean, I guess there's a correlation there, but like obviously not all awkward people have autism. Like you might just feel really uncomfortable being interviewed. Like you might just have stage fright. There are loads of reasons why you might be awkward, right?
Right. And yeah, there have even been studies where they look at people on the spectrum and they would show like a picture or a very short clip without any noise, and people would judge them as less socially competent and they wouldn't want to be their friend, which is like so depressing. I don't know how to like
that's so sad.
Interpret that and not feel like a victim or something. Like I'm still trying to reframe that in my head, but anyway.
That's rough, buddy.
Yeah. So, yes, I do think that something that is associated with autism is high systemizing interests, which is basically trying to understand systems and really look at how inputs affect the outputs, which is sort of similar to mechanical engineering too, where and even like car mechanics, say like trying to understand an engine and the whole system. And like that's basically what you do in coding is there's some system, and like I simulate the entire thing in my head sort of, and like, okay, if I change this one parameter, what happens? And it's so much easier if you can just do that in your head rather than blindly do that. And I mean, I think that there are other things, especially for myself, that I can say cause me to veer towards engineering. Like, I mean, I have lower verbal skills, and so that cut off some avenues. It also, not being able to understand some social situations gives me social anxiety, I guess. And that itself caused me to avoid social situations. And so if I'm not hanging out with people, what am I going to do? I'm going to read books and get better at nerdy stuff.
Magic the Gathering, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have to play with people to do that, though. But, yeah. If you find it hard to spend time with people, right? I think Magic the Gathering is like it's like a tool for making friends without actually having to talk to them. Is that unfair? I do find that so helpful. Like when I first went to university, I had to make a completely new set of friends, right? And just playing games, watching films, like it's just so much easier when there's like a mediating device between you and another person, but you still get all the benefits of spending time with people without all of the awkwardness of trying to find something to talk about,
And like that is also a very male typical thing where men will spend time together just doing a shared activity. And so you don't have to talk about your feelings. You just do the thing together, and that sort of brings you together.
Yeah.
And also another common symptom of at least high functioning autism is sensory hypersensitivity.
Yeah.
And so that itself, so for me, noise is a big thing where I can't even think clearly if there's someone talking. And noise is, if it's really sharp, it'll cause me to jump a little. And so maybe that pushed me more towards not going to large social events and maybe preferring quiet environments.
Yeah. I guess it's one of those kind of vicious cycles. Although it seems like it worked out pretty well for you because you've got a great career in programming. You're very good at what you do. So I suppose so. Just hearing about how you got that job at Google sounds like you must be pretty good at it. And I heard on Joe Rogan's podcast that you're like crazily good at chess. Is that right?
Yeah, I really liked chess growing up. That was another thing where I could just read chess books all day. And
I've never even heard of chess books as a concept.
Yeah, I mean, I had a bookshelf full of them. It was just something to get really into and to really understand the system underneath it was what I really enjoyed. And that's what I really enjoy about board games is I really like reading the rule book and then trying to understand like what the rules are and how the different resources within the game interact with each other. And then just like abstract that all out but then after playing it a few times, I just get bored because I figured it out or something.
Yeah, because you've run like you've done like a like there's a very easy formula for playing. I guess you call it tic-tac-toe. We call it noughts and crosses in England. But it's like there's a way you can play that means you always win. But I'm guessing you can figure that out even for very complex games like Settlers of Catan or something. I mean, chess is probably one of the most complicated games, right? I mean, most complicated popular games. So I'm guessing it's harder to do that with chess, although there are sort of moves that you can do that are considered better than others, right?
Right.
I don't know much about chess, so tell me if I'm if I'm wrong. But there's like opening moves that are better than other opening moves. I'm guessing.
Yeah, people will memorize like 20 moves into the opening and just follow that. And that was one thing that I liked about chess is the complexity because I could just keep reading more and more about it. While even like Magic, there's not that much strategy articles that you can read because so much of it is context dependent and there is that amount of chance and stuff.
Yeah. So going back to the thing about autism, that to me, like I know that there are people who like chess who aren't autistic, diagnosably or whatever, but to me, in my sort of very unscientific worldview of what autism and Asperger's is, I feel like that level of interest in pretty much anything, especially in systems, like you said, like that level of interest and familiarity with what I would consider a pretty dry system, like a program or chess or even a board game is pretty dry compared to a symphony or something. But I feel like that is symptomatic of autism spectrum disorder. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. And also, like trying the exactness of it all, which engineering has a lot of exactness, at least coding, and being able to quickly calculate logical statements. That I think is also related to at least the high systemizing aspect. Yeah. So I think saying just autism can be too broad because there's many different symptoms of it and there's aspects of autism that aren't necessarily useful and some that are, and even like the extreme maleness aspect of it is just the fact that it tends to score higher on systemizing and lower on empathizing, which is the trend that men have.
Yeah, so there's obviously it's not hypermasculine in the sense that it doesn't make you really tall and strong, right? Although I've read up on something that says that autistic males have a more masculine facial structure than what do you call it? I always said heteronormative, neurotypical, the neurotypical males. Have you heard that? maybe
it's
that's what.
possible.
Maybe that's why
I
there's
don't
people
know.
who saw that silent clip of the autistic people were thought they were less friendly because they looked less feminine, perhaps.
I, I I know though that people on the autism spectrum tend to identify more as non-binary, actually, like 5.5 times more likely to.
Oh,
And I mean, part of that could be that just generally nonconformist and not liking rules, like illogical rules set upon them. And
yeah.
that's very true for me. Like there are definitely times when I see the disadvantages of being a man, and I would not want to be one.
Yeah, it seems
And
arbitrary. So you'd want
yeah,
to you'd rather not have arbitrary rules applied to you, right? I can see
yeah,
that
and
obviously.
I think if you look at even feminist activists, they will tend to be more masculine than normal, and I think for the same with men's rights activists, they are probably less gender conforming than normal.
Yeah, interesting. I'd like to see some data on that. I guess I don't know that many people in person who conform to those sort of categories. But yeah, obviously the sort of link I was trying to make with the obviously there's the link between you and autism, which we just discussed. But there's also a link, about obviously there's more autistic men than there are autistic women. It seems like it's like
Mm-hmm.
10 to 1 or something. And I've heard that autism in women is more common than people think because women have the high empathy, the high social skills to hide it, even
Right.
from doctors. It's just not, you can't diagnose it the same way as you can men. But what being that as it is, I think it's interesting to think about how many engineers, and especially like very good engineers, might have sort of, aside from their interests and their skills or whatever, they might have I suppose, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. How many engineers have a low level of autism or a high level, or any level of autism that's higher than normal? Because I think if you tested engineers as a group compared to non-engineers, you'd get a higher level, but there would still be a question of, what's the median level rather than the mean level. Does that make sense?
I mean, there have been studies, and they've shown that people in STEM have more autistic traits than the general population. But I don't know how to necessarily quantify it on the spot.
Yeah, fair enough.
And at least,
I wasn't asking you as like an expert. I'm just thinking out loud because talking to you is just a good excuse for me to, sort of air out my thoughts for for things that would go in a video, but I don't know how to express them concisely enough.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, at least personally, I've noticed that tends to be more systemizing people. But,
Yeah. Well, it's almost if autism is sort of diagnosed or defined by a high systematizing tendency, then you would expect that among people who have high in systematizing, a lot more of them would be autistic. I think what I was trying to say was that because of the autism link, you'd also expect a gender disparity just because of that. If you need a certain level of autism just to be an engineer, then you'd expect more men to pass that bar than women, just because it's more common in men than women. I guess that was my point.
Yeah, and like that was one of my primary points on systemizing versus empathizing. That is influencing the gender gap, and there have been studies that have shown that link.
So
and I think also maybe it's important to realize that like within autism, there's like autism, there's Asperger's, and there's high functioning autism, and like people that actually have autism, very few of them are. I don't know what the term is, but like not even functional really. Like the number of people that have jobs that have autism are like 1 in 6 or something.
Really? Okay.
And so
no, I am aware of the very severe autism that is, it's a disability. I know it's not like on TV where autistic people are like superheroes.
Yeah.
So, just coming off of that, the article I was talking about where what I know that you said it was a Reddit AMA, but that was where I found out about the autism link with you. And to be honest, to me, it sounded like a little bit of a cop-out. Because to me, like, your document was perfectly worded. I mean, maybe that's just because I'm an engineer and you're writing it for engineers, which is what you've said.
Right.
But you were so careful. It seems like you were very careful in defining things in a way and explaining yourself so that people who didn't understand the science would understand what you're talking about. And you said many times that you weren't, what you weren't saying. You were very specific about what you weren't saying and what you were saying. And the fact that people misunderstood you, to be honest, I think is their fault. That wasn't your fault. You wrote it perfectly. You weren't writing it like an unempathetic person. And
right.
I thought it was a little bit of a cop-out. I don't know how much of it was you and how much of it was the journalist writing about you.
Yeah, it was very much like him just asking me questions, and we talked for like 6 hours. So
wow.
It wasn't that I told him, hey, you should write about me having autism or something. He was just interested and said random things, and then he like took things that I said and just split them into the article. So people somehow think that I wrote that, and even I wrote the lawsuit. Like, there are lawyers that write these things,
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm still confused or conflicted about that, in that it does seem like some people will read it and interpret it completely differently than other people.
Yeah. Like, when it's so widely read, I think the number of people who misunderstand it is it's inflated, right? So it seems like an awful lot of people didn't get it, but really I think it was a very small percent. But it just got a lot of there were so many people reading it that the 1% who didn't get it seemed like a really big number. Probably.
Yeah, and it was definitely written for engineers, and so like within the company, I think the amount of confusion was less than it would be in the general population, say, especially the leaked version without any links and stuff.
Was that the one that was on
Gizmodo or something?
Yeah. Yeah, that was the one I read actually. But even then, it was fine. To be honest, like, you don't have, like, you say it's written for engineers, and that's just, I guess, you just saying that's literally who you wrote it for. But that's not to say you have to be an engineer to understand it. Like, you drew the intersecting normal distribution curves and explained how that wasn't the same as it was all very clear. And although, of course, you need a certain amount of intelligence to just comprehend that. I even saw one article, I think it was the Laurie Penny one. She literally admitted she didn't understand what you were saying and still criticized it. It was like, one person, they were like proud of the fact they didn't understand it. They were like, this guy's written a bunch of incomprehensible screed. Like, that was amusing for me.
Yeah, it is something though that I want to work on, being able to understand where people are coming from and not be misunderstood. And I mean, I think just people have different worldviews, and they will assume a certain intent. Like, when I was saying that we shouldn't discriminate based on gender, and by lowering the bar, which, like, they were literally doing that in hiring, people interpreted that as, by hiring women, we are lowering the bar.
Yeah,
yeah. Like, that's not what I was saying. So.
But you can drive yourself crazy. That's what I'm saying. You can drive yourself crazy trying to make it understandable for everyone, but people are still going to misinterpret it, and that's just, I think that's unfortunate, especially since you didn't ask for all this attention in the first place. I think it's incredibly unfortunate that I don't know, if I were you, I'd definitely be having some sleepless nights. So, probably still going like, you're probably still getting tweets, people going like, why did you say this or whatever. Like, that stuff really annoys me when people misunderstand what I've said. And I try to avoid it, but you just can't with everyone, right?
And I mean, I think this also goes back to maybe some of the social anxiety that people that can't understand other people as well get, because, I have to constantly rethink what I say in social situations because I can't tell if it's offensive necessarily.
Yeah, you do like a conversation tree in Mass Effect or like Oblivion, where you go like, if I say this, they could say this, this, or this, and then if they, it's like, I think there's a level of that goes on with everyone, right? But when it's when it's high stakes because you're feeling anxious, I'm guessing you probably do it a lot more, and you're probably more inclined to do that anyway, just because of your personality.
Yeah, and this was a traumatic experience, and so like it's still something that I maybe have to work through, because just even like writing itself is difficult now, because I will assume that people are just going to nitpick everything constantly.
Yeah, that's I was going to say, actually, because I know I've heard you've got a job in just going back to your original skill set, right? Just because you're just an engineer, you're not a science writer. Although I think, like I said, I think your document was very well written, and I'd love to read a blog by you if you released a blog every 10 weeks. But that's not that's not in the future for you, I'm guessing.
I mean, I'm still interested in these things, and I still get sort of obsessed in that I'm annoyed that people get it wrong, and part of it too is I've become more cynical, though, in that I see the hypocrisy on all sides, and even the people that say that they are, like the intellectual dark web type stuff, there are blind spots within that, and
they're all humans, right? Like nobody's no one's immune from their having their own bias and having their own personal flaws, right? So
right, and like there's tribalism within that, and they share so much of the same audiences that it's really hard for them to contradict each other. And like that's something that I see too in my own tweets and stuff, where if I can tell how many retweets or something will get before I write it. And it's okay if it's controversial, if I'm attacking someone, especially if I'm attacking the left or social justice warriors or whatever, like it will get more retweets. But if I, explain the viewpoint of maybe the far left or something, or if I try to show that it's symmetric, then no one will care, and like it's not controversial.
Yeah, I mean, on YouTube, I feel the same way. If I say something controversial, I'll usually get more views than normal, but I'll also get a lot of comments that make me feel bad.
Right.
So it's like a kind of, like I don't, like if I say something that actually feels true to me, but I know is going to upset people, like I'm not trying to stir the pot, but that's what sometimes happens. It just ends up not being, like it feels like it wasn't worth it. But do you think all of this has been, do you regret it? Is what I'm asking. Do you regret everything?
I mean, I think for my personal happiness, it was a net negative. At least since this 1 year. I don't know what the long-term future will be. And I sort of hope that it has opened some people's eyes and maybe changed some things.
I'd call it a net positive on the world, to be honest. But I'm not in your shoes, so I can't tell you that your effect on the world was worth your pain. Right? It's I think it was great for my channel. But just generally, I think it's the day I read your memo, the document, when it was leaked, and it was before anyone had written about it, and I was reading it, and I got about halfway, and I was like, I think this guy has watched Jordan Peterson. And then I got to one bit where you were talking about how we need to ask ourselves why men are driving themselves crazy, working crazy hours every week. And I was like, okay, this guy's definitely watched Jordan Peterson. And it was a beautiful moment for me, because it was all these things that I'd seen Jordan Peterson talking about. I was seeing the effect of it in the world, and the effect of it was that this guy was, well, I don't know if you knew you were putting your job on the line, but it felt like you were sacrificing everything to say something that seemed so obviously true, or at least needed to be said, even if it ends up not being completely accurate. I think what you did, it needed to be said, and it needed to be said now. And I can't tell you that it was worth your suffering, but it was so cool. And I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
Sorry to embarrass you.
I did watch Jordan Peterson before I wrote that, although I think there were many different influences.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
And,
It wasn't like a copy and paste of one of his manifestos or anything. I wasn't trying to like disparage you by saying that. It was just like, sorry, go on.
yeah, and I sometimes regret it in that maybe I could have written the same ideas in a more palatable way and not made it so partisan. Like I thought that the beginning part where I say, this left-wing echo chamber or whatever shames people into silence, I thought that would maybe diffuse it in some ways where like I am fully diagnosing the problem, and if
You also
just
predicted
silence,
exactly what would happen to you, which made it even more like crazy that exact thing did happen. It just kind of proved you right.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that would sort of preempt it, but maybe it just put people on the defensive. So I don't know. I mean, I think some people really identify with that, and that's just not something that I can really understand as much because I just don't identify with things as that much at all.
I just think the fact that it was dangerous to say what you did in that, regardless of how you said it, I think what you said was controversial, and it shouldn't be, but it was, and the fact that it was controversial is the reason why you had to do it. And I'm sorry that it had to be you, because it sucks. I'm sure it sucks to be in your position, but if it was safe to say it, then you wouldn't have had to say it, if that makes sense. I don't know. It was important because it was dangerous, and it was cool to see someone else doing that. And it's a shame that you weren't doing it on purpose, you weren't making a big deal out of it voluntarily. You didn't voluntarily say this to the world. Maybe it was maybe it would have been better if it was someone else.
Yeah, I think I had too much faith in Google, and that I was really doing it to improve Google and to as a response to their request for feedback. And I never foresaw that I could get fired or it would become viral or anything.
I mean, I think you can tell me because you know the Google employees, but it seems, I would imagine that a lot of the engineers would be maybe not in agreement with you, but would at least defend you. Like, a lot of the engineers would be with you, figuratively speaking, even if they didn't literally back you up. Like, they wouldn't have minded you continuing to work there. But because they've got public relations, because they've got a diversity manager, because the CEO needs to make Google look like a progressive company, those were the people who had to make it hard for you. Those are I don't think it was, or maybe it was an engineer, but it only takes one person to leak the memo, the document, one person to spread it around, and it'd be interesting to know who that person was, but I imagine it wasn't someone who, one of the engineers that you intended it for. It wasn't someone who has that systematic, no nonsense feeling of a Google engineer, at least. Although of course there are some engineer drama queens. I'm not trying to talk about some master race of people who are perfectly beautiful, some kind of Vulcan race of engineers. But do you know what I mean? I feel like it must have been someone else who you didn't actually ever intend to read it.
Maybe. I think the response to the memo was really predicted by their political orientation. So, there were women that I talked to, and they were totally fine, and yeah, this is of course true or something. But then there were men that were no, this is disgusting, and it was almost always just, okay, what are your politics? Mm-hmm. And oh, okay, that totally predicts it. And I've been to these conservative things, and just everyone seems to love me. I don't really understand it. And so.
But to be honest, I think there are, I know a lot of left-wing people, my family, people I work with, and even they will admit that there's differences between men and women, right? They'll say, yeah, but there's loads of women in, nursing and being doctors and psychology, right? People know this. People know that men and women aren't identical, and, left-wing or right-wing, I mean, probably the moderates, right? Not the extreme left-wing, but, there's a huge population of people who have political opinions, but are like they still have common sense, if that makes sense.
Right. And I mean, I think the like libertarian versus authoritarian axis is also important in that, where more libertarian, you're like more open to random ideas. And I think you also have less of a disgust signal for that. And yeah, I think also whether it's in a social situation or not matters a lot, so that people will privately know this, but they think that other people will punish them if they don't conform to this groupthink.
Yeah, I recently read the Coddling of the American Mind. I don't know if you read that, Jonathan Haidt and Lukianoff. And they were talking about the sort of 3 characteristics of a witch hunt. And one of the characteristics, like either like a literal witch hunt or a modern day one, and one of the characteristics is that people will stand up for you in public. In private, they'll come to you and say,
Right.
"I agree with you," secretly, like they'll like whisper it in your ear. But in public, they won't say anything, or they might even come out against you in public because they don't want to be. They'll agree with you, but they won't throw their lot in with you. They don't want to become another you. Right, and that's what really frightens me, is like the idea that the world is full of these people who will like, lean into you and say I agree with you, but they'll still throw tomatoes at you.
Yeah, and that happened at Google. I don't know that people actively attacked me while agreeing with me, but there were definitely a ton of people that privately messaged me and said, "Yes, I agree totally," or something, but I'm not going to say anything because I'm going to get fired then, or something.
Yeah. That's really I don't want to judge those people because they've got families, probably they've got a career to think of. It's just a shame that I don't know that seems that's annoying, especially for you. I can understand that would be frustrating for you.
Yeah,
I really don't doubt that Google would have just fired everyone who put up their hand and said I'm Spartacus. I think. Yeah, they're big enough, right? They could have fired 10 people, I guess.
I don't know. I think at that point, something that might have been too much for them to fire so many.
Because of because of how it would look, or because it would be unproductive, or just unethical.
I think. Well, part of it is that the employees can still think now, oh, I need to just not write this and then I'll be safe. But if they're going to fire like 10 people that say, yeah, I agree, then no one is safe. And it truly is an inquisition, right?
You think people wouldn't want to work there anymore after that?
No, and I mean, I think Google's public perception has really dropped since this. It's not something that they really saw coming, I don't think, because they honestly don't care really about what conservatives think. Like, I mean, if you look at like Democrats and like Bernie Sanders or Hillary, they cared so much more about what the educated elite basically thinks about them versus what the deplorables thought about them, right?
Yeah.
And so if Fox News says that Google sucks, they don't care. They don't read it. And they think that, the opposite of whatever Fox News says is true. So, they must be doing some good if Fox News is mad at them.
Yeah. So, how do you feel about Google now? Like, do you use DuckDuckGo? Are you still using Google, YouTube? Like, I'm going to publish this video on YouTube, just so you know. And I'm very much into YouTube because that's where my channel is at the moment.
Yeah, I still use Google.com and Google services. I have become generally pessimistic about the impact of technology on people, though. And this is not something that I really thought about beforehand. But personalized ads, for example, I think that those actually, and that is exactly what Google does and Facebook. Like, that is their whole business model, is personalized ads. And I think that is a huge negative on the world.
Really?
Because, so ads basically feed off your insecurities and try to sell you a false fantasy. And
I just get ads for clothes with shirts like this with like a Pokemon on or something. Like, that's all I get is clothes. But go on. I'm sure other people have worse experiences.
So, I mean, I still think that there is some thing where it's saying that if you buy that shirt, you will be happy. When, at least for me, buying things doesn't ultimately make me happy.
No, yeah, of course
And,
not.
and just like, I think seeing ads everywhere generally makes people less happy. And there have been studies that show that. And there are even like cities that will like tear down all the billboards. And that has shown some positive effect. I mean, I think that is something that we as a country, or just like people in general, maybe need to be more aware of.
Yeah, but you said you're a libertarian, right? So people are choosing to go to Facebook and they're getting some kind of good experience, and they're going there for a reason. And who's to say that that's that they shouldn't? I'm not suggesting that you think Facebook should be shut down or ads are illegal, should become illegal, but do you not think that people have a certain amount of freedom to look at ads if they choose?
So, I mean, when I say that I'm more libertarian, it's more that I have a bias towards libertarianism and that I don't like being told what to do, and I have a very individualism mindset. But like my actual political beliefs are all over the place.
Okay.
And I mean, I think one solution, if it's not like government mandated, is just raising the awareness that yes, personalized ads and tech addiction are a huge scourge on our society. Really, like it's causing people to feel more isolated, and which then turns them into these, like they need some community to find, so they turn into like the alt-right or social justice warrior or something, because
no, I definitely
that
agree.
is the community that they can get in. And so I mean, I think we need to acknowledge that these are problems, and if Facebook and Google and Twitter and stuff want better PR, then they need to address it, right? So, and if they don't address it, then maybe, yes, for the good of society, I think that the government can step in, just as they do for cigarettes and alcohol. Like alcohol has negative externalities on people, and it stupefies its users, and it ruins people's lives if, drunk driving. So the government steps in. The same thing happens to social media. It stupefies its users, and it causes, havoc for random people.
Okay. But what do you think is, I think you're absolutely right with social media in general. Like, I've recently been very aware that the idea that I should care what someone on the internet thinks of me is just an illusion. Because we're programmed to have face-to-face interactions with people whose opinions actually matter.
Right.
But I'm slowly coming to the terms of the fact that the opinions of someone who thinks that I'm a white supremacist, that person's opinions don't actually matter. Like, it doesn't actually matter what they think of me, but it's hard to make myself believe that. But back to personalized ads, though, I'm interested to hear why you think the fact they're personalized makes them worse than... I mean, you're talking about billboards as well, but do you think it's worse than having just general, normal ads for things that you don't want?
Yeah, I think that sort of the definition of, or why Google and Facebook make so much money, is because personalized ads make you to spend more money than non-personalized ads.
Yeah.
And so they are more effective. And if Facebook can tell that you have some insecurity about your weight or something, which they probably can, then they will give you things that make you even more insecure about that. And like, this is why magazines, for example, they're full of advertisements. They make you feel as horrible as possible. They put someone that's super attractive and even more extreme than what the other gender wants. So like the women are thinner than what men actually want. And they have like so much makeup on that men don't even like that. And same with like men's magazines, they'll be way buffer than what women want.
Yeah. And but the audience, like, they're not, obviously they're not doing that to make you feel bad. They're doing that to make you buy the magazine, and you're more likely to buy it the more beautiful the person on the cover is, right? So you're choosing to engage with that, right?
I think part of it is to make you feel bad, and hey, we'll tell you how you can look like this.
I mean, maybe there's an element of that. Yeah, I think though, even though it's kind of unrelated, and maybe I shouldn't even be bringing it up, but I think it's interesting about the about what you were saying about what women's magazines say is the most beautiful woman versus what men will actually be attracted to. And I think the important thing there is that it's the women who are judging the attractiveness. The woman who's buying the magazine is judging the attractiveness of the woman. And I think there's a difference between what a woman will find attractive in another woman compared to what a man will look for, like what attractiveness signals a man will look for. Maybe he'll look for, a curvier woman with, you know what I'm talking about, the
Right.
lumps in the right places, right? But the women, they'll look for the skinny woman for some reason with the flat chest and I don't know why, but it just seemed strange that for whatever reason women do find something more attractive about the supermodel look, the really tall, slender ladies, rather than a man who probably wants a woman shorter than him, right?
Yeah. So I don't fully understand the reasons behind that.
Yeah, neither do I.
But it is an effect that I've seen where gay men and women will rate women's attractiveness consistently differently than men will. And I mean, part of that could also be that women in general aren't as consistent with their ratings of men, which could be related to like rating men differently based on your hormone cycle. Basically, like when you're really fertile, women tend to rate hyper masculine men higher.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It always comes back to gender differences when I'm talking to you. Yeah, just talking about ads, but yeah, no, I think it's good. I told you this wasn't going to be a formal interview, so I'm glad that we're going off on tangents because, that's probably it's probably a sign that it was, it's a good conversation, right? We have been talking for an hour and a half, which is probably the ceiling of what most people will tune in for. I mean, there's always a drop-off rate, like, the longer it is, the less people watch the end, but all the same, unless there's any burning questions or things that you really wanted to get off your chest, things that are interesting to you, any final thoughts?
So, I mean, I did have a question regarding the sort of demographics and politics within YouTube or of YouTube creators, because, I've heard some left-wing people criticize YouTube in that saying it's, all right-wing people or something. And so I think at least my diagnosis of it has been that it's people that feel like their voice is not represented in the mainstream. They are much more likely to be popular on YouTube and to like create their own videos themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And so like even the left-wing people tend to be like Marxists and stuff, which is not that popular in mainstream media. And most of the media is left-leaning, so that would cause there to be a lot more right-wing things, especially extremist stuff. And I mean, it's also related to, and I was wondering if you had some thoughts on this, where all of the videos of people commenting on my case and stuff, they have all been positive for me, like towards me on YouTube. The only negative ones have been like mainstream media things posting their stuff on it.
Yeah.
And
I didn't get any bad feedback for that video either. Some people said I was brave for posting it, but nobody criticized me for it. I mean, there's a few dislikes on the video, but that might have just been because the audio was terrible. I don't know. I don't know why those people dislike the video, but all of the comments were positive about my video. So I think you're absolutely right about that. There's something going on. And I think it is just because, I mean, you would know about the algorithm better than me. You're probably best friend programmed it or whatever. The YouTube algorithm, it recommends videos to people who will like those videos, not to people who will dislike them. But it is weird that there weren't any videos attacking you. It is very strange. I agree. I don't really know. I don't have an explanation other than what you've said, which seems very reasonable.
Yeah, it seems like if all of the mainstream media is already saying the same things, then there's no reason for someone to post a video repeating it, right?
Yeah, I do wonder how representative of the mainstream media is, because I saw I think it might have even been that article I was just about you, the one by Laurie Penny on The Guardian, all the comments on her article were negative. Like, people had gone to her article to read about you, and presumably some of them were Laurie Penny fans, but none of them were defending what she said because she was lying about you. And all of the comments were saying that she's lying. And I'm thinking, like, who is she writing this for? Because it seems like everybody who's read this hates it. Like, why are they employing these writers who apparently no one likes? I guess comment sections aren't a good indicator of that, but it seems bizarre.
It is always comforting for me to, when I read that negative article and see the comments are almost always positive towards me. And
yeah, for most people it's the opposite though. Like, I listen to Dan Harmon's podcast. He made Rick and Morty and Community. I don't know if you even like TV, but on his podcast he says, like, whenever there's a news story about him, he'll sometimes, like, peek at the internet to see what is going on, and it's all, like, he hates it because, like, it's all negative. Like, people always, like, talking shit about him. And he just can't look at it at all anymore. But it's so weird that you have the absolute opposite experience. Even though, like, he made 2 beloved TV shows. He's like an entertainment genius. I mean, he's done some questionable things. That's why people don't like him. But it's weird that you wrote a controversial document and people love you on the internet. And, like, you're right. It's odd. It's good though, right? It has to be good for you. Whatever's going on.
Like, the mainstream media often represents, large corporations and stuff, and just attacking Google, at least initially before this last year, was very dangerous for journalists, because if they were a tech writer and attacked Google, then they just wouldn't get any of the previews and stuff that Google does send to journalists. And so I think that initially influenced a lot of the negative.
Yeah, I hadn't imagined it was something that sinister, to be honest. I always just thought, like, put it down to ideology, like, to bias. Like, to think that it could be something that sinister is quite, frightening. And I know that's pretty common as a belief, right? Everyone knows journalists are corrupt. So, I know that's not, you're not insane for saying that. There are lots of people who think that. It's not something that I've ever, subscribed to, but, like, yeah, I mean, you're right. It does seem like the mainstream media are not representing the mainstream. They're representing the corporations, at least in this case, right?
Yeah. And I think, there's just general laziness. There's just so many pressures to try to get clicks and to push your thing out as early as possible. And, considering how much heat I got for my document, them having, no actual knowledge of this stuff, they can't really defend it unless they read a lot into it. So it's much easier for them to just misrepresent what I said and attack it.
Yeah, right? Definitely. It'll get more clicks as well, obviously. I wonder how much clicks articles that are intentionally wrong, like intentionally anger-inducing because they're incorrect, whether that makes more money than an article that is actually true and people know it's true. If that makes sense? Like, it's false, but it's not just that it's sensationalist, it's also that it makes people angry because they know it's false. So people will click on that. Like, maybe there's, like, some sort of anger machine running the internet.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. Although it does have long-term costs for the media company itself.
Yeah, because they lose reputation, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but just in case you were wondering, I don't know, just when you were talking about YouTube and politics, I thought perhaps you might be interested to know that 95% of the views on my videos are from men. And they're surprisingly old for YouTube as well. Like, that's like a weird thing, is there's no teenagers watching my videos, barely. A lot of them are 25 to 44. But anyway, that applies to my video about you as well. Like, it's pretty consistent among all my videos, but it is weird that YouTube does have this male skew, especially in the politics commentary sector. It seems like a lot of men are reading, which also might explain why more of them were supportive of you than women. Although I'm not trying to say that women are more feminist than men, but it would certainly make sense if that were the case. More women happen to be feminists than men are. That's just, there are male feminists, obviously.
Right.
Some of them wrote about you.
I think one thing influencing that too is just the nastiness of YouTube comments, at least historically too. men tend to be more accommodating of just harassment in general, and so like there's just so much trash on the internet that pushes women out of those platforms, and so like that could have influenced the demographics of YouTube itself.
Yeah,
I think 4chan
there
is
are
similar.
girly channels that are subscribed, like a lot of women commenting on them. It's like YouTube has like done this magical thing where it seemed to like create these echo chambers for its own benefit, right? It's like you can watch the beauty vloggers and you'll never have to see a video with me talking about economics. You'll never even know that I exist. You might not even ever know that PewDiePie exists, right? Because he's the biggest YouTuber there is, and he probably gets recommended more than any one other creator. But so many people who I work with, older generation, they use YouTube and they've never heard of him. They've never seen one of his thumbnails appear. And you can use YouTube and you're just completely in your own bubble. If you're just looking at beauty videos, that's all you'll ever see. And it's kind of beautiful, but it's also kind of scary, just, politically speaking.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that YouTube's core metric is watch time. Yeah. That's pretty much all they care about. And Facebook probably has a similar thing where just time spent on Facebook is their core metric.
Yeah,
which is horrible.
Yeah. They don't want you to ever see your kids, or they don't want you to go outside.
Yeah.
The Nintendo Wii comes up with that notification in the middle of the screen saying like, maybe you should try going outside if you play it for more than 4 hours. Like, I don't know if they still do that, but that was I think you used to do that, but it's like YouTube's never going to say that to you. Like Facebook will never say that to you.
And that's because they run on advertising, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more explicitly libertarian than you are. I mean, I know temperamentally and politically, I've got no social hang-ups about adverts. Although I am personally anti-consumerist. I don't believe that adverts make people happy or that buying things will make people happy. I still think they should have the freedom to, I feel like the service should have the freedom to do that, and the people should have the freedom to choose whether or not to use that service. And maybe that's a debate for another time when you become a full-time YouTube commentator, like not like me, because I just do it in the evening. But like I said, I would love to see more of you online, and it is a bit of a shame for me that you're probably just going to disappear down the memory hole of the collective conscious.
Yeah, that would also be good for me in some ways.
Well, in that case, I hope it does.